Welcome to the February 22nd, 2018 episode of Reactive Consciousness, our in-depth podcast about what happened this week in our lives. I'm your host, vysethebold, and this is...
Lotus Prince.
And PyroJackFrost.
For those of you who were listening, that was the best take.
47 takes, and that was the best one.
I did not. But you know, we got to keep going. We got to keep this train going. So anyway, we have the OG3 here, and we have decided that we wanted to talk a little bit about the retro gaming landscape. I know that this is something that Lotus and I are very much into. I know Pyro, you probably kind of are like, you know, a little interested in it. Yeah, passing interest. But I know it's not your big thing. But what's been going on has been like fascinating. I think in the retro console sphere, there's like a lot of interest in making our old systems like the best they can be, the best versions of what could be, and there have been a lot of videos and video reviews on the Super NT that was just released by Analog, and it is a fantastic piece of hardware, I have to say. So what it is, for anybody who doesn't know, is it's a hardware clone of the Super Nintendo. It's very similar to the Analog NT Mini that was released a couple years ago, and the Nintendo AVS that was released a little while ago as well by Retro USB. So what it is you may think, you know, what's so special about these in comparison to the ones you find at, like, you know, all kinds of different retro gaming stores for years now. So all of those were basically like clone systems. They kind of were like emulation systems, and kind of... Yeah, and were very imperfect.
Yeah, like the most famous example of those is probably the Retron. And the Retron, for whatever the hell system you're using it for, like Sega or Super Nintendo or like whatever, what it does is it accepts your cartridges. But what happens is it doesn't play the games off of the cartridge. It understands the data that is written in the cartridge, and then it dumps the data and it runs it through an emulator like you might do on your PC or something. You know, like you download the actual ISO of the game and then you play it that way.
Those in particular are actually like ripped off Android emulators. Okay. So there was actually a big controversy with the Retron 5 in that it was cool that it could play all this stuff, but it used emulators against without asking permission of the people who wrote them. There's like a big thing about them in the retro gaming community. I mean, they are imperfect, those systems, and they're really good for people that have a passing interest. I've always said this kind of thing, but they're not good for me. They're not good for Lotus. You know, because otherwise
they're too plebe for you.
No, it's not that. It's more like I have the old systems. We have the old systems.
That's the thing. The Retron is cool, but like because I have, if I didn't, this might be a different story. But because I have a FrameMeister, which can convert and upscale the video and send it out through HDMI, it's cheaper just to buy the old systems. Like I have the systems, I have the cartridge. Like I'm good. The Retron's a really nice, convenient choice though, especially if you didn't have these, you don't want to go looking for a freaking Sega Genesis. Like, where are you going to find those if you don't have a retro store near you?
I also am technologically inclined. Like, I can run an emulator off of a laptop very easily. So, like, if I really wanted to a good emulator, like there's like Higan for instance, which is a really super accurate Super Nintendo emulator. I can just run that off the computer. I mean, Higan is extremely accurate. It's very, very, very close.
Yeah. Now, like, here's the thing with the new systems regarding back to Vice's question of like, oh, why not those? Why not the clone systems? The thing with the new systems is they're not made by these big like super companies like Hyperkin, which like there are stores selling Retrons. Like you can go to the store and find a Retron. Um, these you usually have to get online from the developers themselves, and they're in relatively limited quantities, and they're kind of expensive for what they are, but they are of better quality. The main difference, and we've discussed this a long time ago on the podcast, but the main difference with the AVS and the NT Mini and the Super NT is that they are not software emulators, but rather hardware emulators. Like the actual system understands your cartridge and runs it like an original Nintendo or a Super Nintendo would. And yeah,
I'll explain this, and actually, Pyro, you might have a better understanding of this since you program. So these new systems, the NT Mini, the Super NT, and the analog AVS, or not analog AVS, the retro USB AVS, are FPGA systems, FPGA based systems. I don't know if you know what an FPGA is.
I do not.
Okay, so it's a field programmable gate array. So what it does is it allows you to program a series of circuits and a series of you can basically program an entire circuit board into it. It'll mimic it. So essentially, if you know the entire design of an old system and program it into it, it will behave exactly like one.
Oh, cool.
So there's no overhead. For instance, all emulators run, beneath an operating system.
Yep.
So
probably I'm sorry, real quick. The best example I could think of this, just to put things into perspective, is a virtual machine. Like,
correct.
Okay.
If I want to run Windows 3.1, I'm not doing that unless I buy an old computer, or if I emulate it, but then I'm running Windows in Windows. So if I want to play a really old game, I'm running the game in Windows, Windows. So my performance may be good, but not ideal because a lot of other stuff is chugging in the background. Same goes for even basic emulators. If I want to play a Super Nintendo game, those aren't the most resource-consuming things, but I'm still running Super Nintendo on Windows 7 or 8 or 10 or whatever it is.
Exactly. And there's always some inherent lag in all of the different parts talking. So for instance, like the emulator needs to communicate with the controller that you have plugged in, and that first has to talk to your operating system. And vice versa, like the emulator has to talk to your operating system to tell it to display something or to play a sound. So it is not directly outputting this stuff to you. It has to go through a middleman. It has to go through your computer first. The FPGA should be an exact clone of the system that it's trying to emulate, which is fantastic. It's really cool, and they've only just gotten affordable enough and big enough to make something like a Super Nintendo happen within its confines. So it's really, really neat. The analog systems, the analog NT and the Super NT, were programmed by the guy who I don't know if you guys were back in the emulator scene. I know Pyro, you were a little bit back in the day. In fact, you actually introduced me to the concept of emulators back in the day.
I created a monster.
But the guy made the file extension for NES music.
Okay.
So yeah, like if you wanted to listen to NES music without it being like an MP3 file, he invented it. His name's Kevin Horton. He also came up with the HDMI mod for the NES as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
He's been really involved in these old systems for a very long time, and in fact has released cores of other systems so you can play them on here, because there's no reason why it can't handle other systems too. So it's really neat. So I just received my Super NT, and I believe, Lotus, you did as well.
That's right.
Have you had a chance to fool around with it a little bit?
Not really, but I actually very much look forward to doing so, because I mentioned this to you on the phone before, but the most trouble I've had with my current recording setup has been with the Super Nintendo. I had streamed the original Donkey Kong Country, and I had a blast. But the problem was, even with my current recording setup, which is superior to my older recording setup, it either took me absolutely forever for my recording program to render the file, when normally it takes like a minute or two. It took me like upwards of an hour, which is like, I couldn't believe it, like not even close. Or it would take a reasonable amount of time, but there would be audio and video desync, which I haven't had to worry about since my previous recording setup. So part of the reason I wanted a Super NT was that I hoped that it would circumvent that problem, because it's just a different machine, and it has HDMI out instead of futzing with RGB and the FrameMeister and things like that. And by the way, one thing I also should mention, which I don't believe other clone systems do this, is that, maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe both the Super NT and the NT Mini take whatever accessories their original systems could have plugged into them, like a light gun, if for some reason you are capable of playing a light gun with an HDMI accepting TV. But I think my favorite part about the original NES, like the what's it called, the NT Mini, is that it actually has microphone support for your controller. And the reason I mentioned that, well, not for your controller, but it has microphone support. And why the hell would an NES have microphone support? Well, it never did, but the Famicom did. What's cool about the NT Mini and the Super NT are that they are designed they're designed to be region free, so you can put whatever game in you want. But
yeah, the NT Mini has a Famicom and an NES slot.
Yeah, so the reason
really?
Reason this matters is that, Pyro, you may know this, but this isn't the most common knowledge, is that there were some games for the NES that lost a bit in translation on the way over to the West. Like, my go-to example is Castlevania 3. The original Famicom cartridge had more audio tracks in it. Like, if you go to YouTube right now... Yeah, if you go to YouTube right now and you listen to Castlevania 3 Level 1's music, it still holds up. But if you listen to the Famicom version, it's like, whoa. And the thing is, the system had extra parts in it to read these extra tracks on the Famicom cartridge. So even if you imported Famicom Castlevania 3 and you put it in your NES, the game will run, but you won't have that extra audio because the NES doesn't know how to understand it, while Famicom does. And the NT Mini and the AVS have that capability. But like I said, the NT Mini also has microphone support, which sounds completely pointless, but there were a couple of Famicom games that made use of this, the most famous probably being the original Legend of Zelda. Pyro, did you have Legend of Zelda growing up?
No.
The reason
I didn't have
asked,
an NES.
Yeah, neither did I. Well, did you ever have the opportunity to read the instruction manual?
Nope.
Okay, because there's one enemy. This is one of the instruction manuals I really like, just retro manuals, is that they would give you a little bit of information about some of the monsters in the game. I'm just always a sucker for that. But one of the monsters looks like a little bunny rabbit in the game, and it's called a Pulse Voice. And the instruction manual says it doesn't like loud noises, and this baffled Americans for decades.
Because you could talk into the controller of the original.
That was the whole thing. So we were like, "Do you play the flute?" Like, and it just like, it was a proper translation in the manual, but the game didn't translate. So what you're supposed to do is yell into the second player's microphone, and it just kills all Pulse voices on the screen at once, which is just kind of a cool thing.
to the functionality that the original DS had. Like
yeah,
a lot
exactly.
of
Like when you
games
shout out
use that
objection, it's
microphone.
it's kind of like that for like Phoenix Wright or whatever. The NES had a degree
or
of
Lunar
support for
DS or Lunar Dragon Song where you had to yell "run" at it. Run!
Get the
Wait,
hell out of
really?
here.
No, you had to do that.
That's really-
part of
kind
what
of
the
dumb.
That's very
it was a
annoying.
piece of shit.
That's very annoying. But so
Yeah.
like the thing is, the NT Mini has that. Like the NT Mini has everything that the NES and any of its iterations could possibly do, and the Super NT, I think, has that going on for the Super Nintendo. It has region-free stuff, and
Yeah, it
can't-
has a slot that can accept games from any region.
yeah, which is basically just a European slot. Like the American slot was the weird one. If you have a European slot, then I think you could just put in a game and you're good. The only like I can't really speak for extra audio channels or whatever because with stuff like Star Fox with the extra video capability, that was in the Star Fox cartridge itself. So like that you need the cartridge for that, not the system. But the Super NT, as far as I'm aware, does everything that you would want it to. You could still hook up your accessories.
Yes.
It still takes the Super Game Boy, I believe.
The-
So
the
you're in
only
a
thing-
good space.
It doesn't work with right now is the Super Scope, and that's because
Okay.
that's because of the inherent nature of the Super NT versus the analog NT Mini. The analog NT Mini was designed for people that wanted to play the system on both CRTs and
Yeah.
new flat screen TVs.
It has a
So
bunch of video outputs.
it has HDMI output, but it also has like RGB out. It has S video out. You know, the whole litany of analog outputs. The Super NT is designed for the majority in that it of people, in that it's a solution for people that want to play it on flat screens. Just
Yeah, it's HDMI
they're-
only.
it's HDMI only. And the reason why I said now is they are working on a solution where it'll convert it to analog on the
Nice.
fly. So you could purchase an accessory supposedly. So that's actually part of the reason why I think that they have been out of stock on the analog NT Mini for so long. It's because I think they are redesigning it to be cheaper. And
Yeah, it's like $500.
Yeah. Whereas the Super NT is much more technologically advanced and only like $200.
Yeah, it's about 200. Yeah.
They just want to reduce the amount of components, you know. So the Super NT is digital only now, but it does its job. It's great at what it does, and like if you want to play it on a CRT, just stick with your original system.
I know, right?
I don't know what you're doing.
You don't need
How
to
hard is it
upscale
to
it
pick
because
up
it's a
like
CRT.
an original system, though?
It's very, very easy. Super Nintendos are super easy to find.
Yeah,
I mean,
like in a store, you may or may not see one, but like
$40.
they're like $60, $70
$40
on eBay or whatever.
40 to 60 depending on which version of the system.
Yeah.
80 if you want a SNES Junior maybe, which is the second iteration.
Yeah, the tiny one.
Yeah, I mean, they're not expensive. So if you want to play your Super Scope games, by all means, please.
That's the
Please
thing.
do.
Like it's like
With
the
the
cost of a
original
TV and the SNES and the game and the Super Scope would probably be cheaper, or at least around the same as like the Super NT, the Super NT. So it's just like if you're that desperate to play on a CRT, then just do it. Like just you might as well get the original system. It's like it was like my argument against Ocarina of Time for the 3DS. Like if you're interested in the portability, then it's a no-brainer. Go for the 3DS game. But what bothered me is that like I'm the kind of guy who wants to play on a big screen and be able to record it. So I was like, well, let me think. It's $200-ish for a 3DS and $50 for Ocarina of Time, or I could spend $20 on original Ocarina of Time and like $30 on a CRT and like $50 on an N64. Like it's still all cheaper. So I was like, oh, I'll just go with that. I don't care.
It also depends on, like, I mean, supposedly you're not buying a 3DS just for that.
No, I know, but I do remember when the game first came out, there were some people saying, "Oh, I'm gonna get like a 3DS just for this," and I'm like, "That is a waste of money, unless you really want to play it portably."
Yeah, I think the argument there is that it's a tip over point. Not
Yeah,
like
that I
just
can
for
understand.
this.
Yeah, like, oh, also Ocarina of Time. Yeah, that I can understand. Yeah.
But anyway, I just want to talk about the Super NT. I have had a chance to play around with it for about an hour, and already I noticed the difference. It is better than its original hardware.
Oh, nice.
Like, it's the only time that I've like ever really said that about like a clone or emulated system or anything like that.
Yeah, because the irony is that normally they're supposed to be exactly as good as the original hardware, just upscaled or something.
No, it's just
but
better.
What Vice has told me on the phone before, this is actually better than a real SNES.
So there are many things that are better about it, but a couple of them are just superficial, like stuff that we have already told you. But number one, absolute number one thing being that if you're in like if you're anyway part of the majority of people, you will want to be playing your old systems on a new type of screen.
Mm-hmm.
So in doing that, it is a fucking hassle to play old games correctly on a new screen, and I'll be the first to admit that. I have a lot of equipment that allows me to play this properly and in a way that's displayed and sounds good.
That's the thing. Well, that's what's so frustrating, though, is like you could buy a composite to HDMI adapter without too much trouble, but then you have two problems. The first is proper scaling. Well, what did you say?
Timing. Timing is the big thing.
Oh, I didn't even think about timing. But yeah, there is timing. You'd have input lag because HD TVs load. But okay, so that's three things I can think of. So there's scaling, proper aspect ratio. You could just play it to fill the screen, but it's not quite the same if you care about that kind of thing. But also, the nature of composite, now that we know that you can do better, because if you want the game itself to look better, for the resolution to be better, then the way to do it with old systems before component video is typically RGB, but American TVs don't take that, with very, very few specific, like not for retail exceptions. Correct. So if you want RGB cables, you have to import those just by themselves, but you'll also need to get a device that accepts RGB and then have that convert to an HDMI. That's basically why I have the FrameMeister. It's for better resolution and to compensate for timing. It's like, it's doable, and it's not that hard, but it's a bunch of different pieces, and it's expensive. If you just want to hook up an SNES to an HDTV, you can just do composite directly to HDMI, but it just won't look great. Like, you could do it, but it won't be ideal.
Yeah, and not only that, but old systems transmit into 240p.
That's right.
New televisions are not equipped to deal with that like naturally. So what it does is it takes the old signal and up converts it. So it takes time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, since it's not in a natural resolution that it understands, it takes time. Old video games are very much timing based. They're based on Twitch gameplay and fast reactions.
Yeah, like Donkey Kong Country and Mario, like you must have timing.
Yeah, so therefore, those types of games are impossible to play on a system unless you've already done the upscaling in something that does it faster than any TV would, which is where the FrameMeister or the OSSC comes in, the open source scan converter. Those are the two most popular ways to do this. So those things are expensive. They take an expert level of research and dedication into working well, and also getting your systems in the shape to best be displayed by them. It takes money to buy these cables. It takes money to. Some systems need to be RGB modded in order to output their best analog video. So like all of these things take time, take money, take research to do, and you need to find somebody who can do them. I've done this all because I'm dedicated and I like it, but it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, the thing I'm happy about for my systems is that, like, Vice's particular, like, he wanted the best kind of Super Nintendo, so that required an RGB mod, but I'm working with an older Super Nintendo, and it just takes it, and, like, with the Genesis, the Saturn, the PS1, I think the PS2, a lot of systems will just take RGB, which is fantastic. The original
they naturally
NES
can output it.
Yeah, the original NES, not a chance in hell. We're talking fucking coax and bullshit, like composite if you're lucky. So that you will need a mod for sure.
Yeah. So already I could tell you that because of that, because you don't need a middleman in order to convert all that crap. It already is playing the games in their truer timing. Because it outputs at 1080p or 720p, whatever. All TVs right now can natively take that resolution. So that's number one.
Well, actually, just tying to that real quick, what Vice had mentioned regarding research for the FrameMeister, and I assume the OSSC, is that, like, different systems have different ways of outputting their signal. So, like, if you hook up a Genesis to a FrameMeister and then a PS1, it's not just going to make it 1080p. Like, you have to program the way to make it look right. And again, this is a thing that is very doable. You can download other people's pre-programmed stuff, but you got to do that. So like Vice said, this system, like the Super NT, just for Super Nintendo stuff, obviously, but this system says just do 1080p, and it knows what to do. So that saves you considerable time and effort.
So, number two, its output is digital to the point where, like, any amount of video noise, even in the cleanest RGB signal, even with the best setup before with the FrameMeister or the OSSC, you will still have noise. You will still have blacks that have a purple hue to them, for instance. Things like that. This provides a true black when it's displayed. So like if you're playing a game with space in the background, it's gonna look like space. It's gonna look really, really good. The third thing is that it has digital audio. So the Super Nintendo is not known for its sound chip. It's known for its sound, but it is not well known for its output. Its output is actually pretty terrible, like the quality of it. The actual, like, music is good. You know, the people that programmed for it, and also, you know, what you could do with it was really revolutionary.
That's the thing. In the big Genesis Super Nintendo wars, it was generally agreed upon that the Genesis's chip is impressive, but Super Nintendo, with few exceptions, sounds better. Especially if systems were released for both. Like if you could do a side by side comparison of the same game, oftentimes Super Nintendo wins.
Well, it's kind of like...
well, like Zombies Ate My Neighbors, like Super Nintendo. Like,
it's
no way.
Like comparing a saxophone to a violin.
No, it is, but like...
You play the same music, but it's not going to sound the same.
That's the thing. Like, Earthworm Jim sounds better on the Genesis, but Zombies Ate My Neighbors is, like, far and beyond better on the Super Nintendo, like, with sound.
Exactly. Yeah. So, anyway, the thing is, the Super Nintendo had a really great ability to use samples, which the Genesis did not. So you could have real world instruments kind of coming through in it. So as a result, though, it was very muffled sounding coming out of the system. It didn't have a clean output. It just didn't sound good. This sounds beautiful coming out of the sound bar that we have.
I look forward to that, especially for stuff like final boss themes. I just want to hear the big show-stopping music.
It sounds so much better. It's ridiculous, and especially with so you could use an EverDrive with it, which I've been doing, just like you can with a real system. I have an EverDrive, which is a flash card. You could play special hacked games that have like CD quality music. It used to sound okay on the original system. But now
That's
I
the
play
thing,
Rock
like,
and Roll Racing, the
Yeah.
hack for Rock and Roll Racing. So the original Rock and Roll Racing had like fake versions of real rock songs on it.
How are
and
they?
so, like,
how are they fake?
Well, no,
So
you
they were basically
knockoff.
like chiptune versions, or like rip-off
Okay.
versions of like Bad to the Bone, for instance.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I remember actually James Rolfe, like the Angry Video Game Nerd, had mentioned for the Amazing Spider-Man Maximum Carnage, there was one particular track in the game that I think was like directly from, I forgot, it was Metallica or Black Sabbath, and I hadn't heard any of their music at the time, so I was like, oh really,
Yeah.
that was what happened? So like, theoretically, somebody could upload a hack of that game with just the actual music in that one
Yeah.
part of the game.
So Rock and Roll Racing was doing this on purpose, though. Every single track is basically a direct rip-off. Like, you can easily tell that it's a rip-off of a song, of real songs. So real classic hard rock songs. So somebody made a hack that just strips out the old versions of the songs and puts the real songs in. So you could play it, and you'll have like Ozzy Osbourne singing "Paranoid."
Yeah, that's hysterical.
So I played that, and it sounds just like a CD, like coming right out of the sound bar. Like,
because that's the thing with the hack. Like Vice said, it sounded okay. Like comparatively, it sounded way better than the original SNES track. Like, listen to that quality increase, but it's not like you listening to the music in your car quality increase.
Exactly, and this like literally is. So there's all that, plus the fact that you can play the system in any region at the correct timing. So you can even play European games with the correct timing if you so wish. European games are typically slower.
And because oftentimes, like they also got games that were designed for US systems, so it's like, oh man, slow down. But then there are some games that were designed for Europe, like Terranigma or something. So if we were to play that, then it would be weirdly fast. So being able to play it at the proper 50 hertz is the way to go.
Yeah, I can actually put in my my actual copy of English copy of Terranigma, and it will play perfectly. So this thing is awesome. I recommend anybody buy it over if you are into Super Nintendo stuff at all. And just buy this and an EverDrive, and you're set. I mean, you might need to buy a couple other games because of the 6 games that are incompatible.
Like we mentioned, Star Fox. Like if you want like EverDrive, like I said, Star Fox looks the way it does because there's special hardware in the cartridge. So an EverDrive will not do Star Fox. So you'll have to buy Star Fox, but it's like what, like $15? It's like whatever. Like,
I mean, I tested Contra 3, Gradius 3, and Rock and Roll Racing on it, and like Contra 3 is like my test to make sure that something is accurate, because like the time, tons of things can't run it well. It's awesome. It runs perfectly, and not only that, but it comes with 2 games pre-installed on the Super NT.
2 of them, really? I knew it came with Super Turrican.
So it comes with Super Turrican Director's Cut. Which is so Super Turrican came out and was released. However, they had planned on it being a lot bigger, with an extra level and more enemies. But they didn't. There was a shortage, or they couldn't order it, or they decided to cut it down to use the cheaper chips that didn't hold as much. So they had to cut out a whole bunch of content. This is the first time it's ever been released in its full form.
That's cool. I didn't even know that. What's the other game?
And they released Super Turrican 2 as well.
Oh, okay.
Which is as it was.
Yeah, double Turrican action.
So I played that on it, and boy, does it sound good. It just sounds great. Sounds and looks great, and I recommend anybody pick one of these up because it is awesome, great value.
Best value.
And yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Because I was going to segue into something else.
Yeah, I was going to segue into the next thing too. So go right ahead.
All right, well, real quick, because this is going to be more like me focused before we start talking about the other thing. But
you.
I know. So Navice had mentioned like digital out versus analog out and stuff like that for the Super NT. And that leads to a segue for what I had mentioned in Corrective Consciousness, which I had gotten my GameCube back from the shop with an external HDMI mod. And I was just talking about how I don't want to go through the time, money, and effort of modding my systems to have whatever, better cable out unless there's a pretty wild difference. So I had that done with the N64, and I'm also doing that with the GameCube HDMI out because it's either that or composite, and that was it. Like, there's no RGB option for those. In America natively, so like there's no RGB, so like the quality is either going to be very mediocre, like S-Video at best, or HDMI mod. Now the GameCube does have component cables, and if I had those, then I would have just let that sit. But the component cables are like insane. They're like $250 because they're weird, like analog, or what was it, digital component cables or something. Like there's something that doesn't jive with other component cables.
Nintendo was very weird when they made this. So it has a digital output. The system has a digital output, but at the time, nothing else had a digital input that you could put it into. So therefore, they made a special cable that has a chip in it that converts it from digital to analog.
Oh, okay, that's what it is.
Just kind of like we were talking about what analog, the NT manufacturer is thinking about doing. They're thinking about coming out with some sort of solution
something like
that converts one to the other. Well, that's what Nintendo did, and they basically only sold these on their website and stuff.
Yeah.
So I picked one up because I was a nerd back in the day and I knew what it was. So I picked it up way back when, and I picked it up for like $30, at a GameStop when I was working there. Way back in the day, because I had a CRT that took component at the time, which is kind of a rarity. I've just had them. So anyway, nobody made a third party version of that because it has extra hardware in it.
It's weird. So the thing is, if I want to play GameCube games with better visual, then I can just use a Wii, because the Wii uses generic component cables, and that's fine. But if I want to play like the Game Boy Player, if I want to play Game Boy Color, or Game Boy Advance games, then that's on the GameCube, which has composite only. Again, it has component, but not for me. So I got the HDMI mod for that. So I'm excited at the opportunity to, again, I could skip the FrameMeister step now. I can just hook the GameCube up to the TV or to my capture device. So I'm pretty happy that that's going to finally become a thing.
Which mod is it? Because there's a number of GameCube HDMI solutions.
I'm afraid I forgot the name. I'll have to look it up later. But this is something unlike the Nintendo 64 mod that I got. This is not an internal mod. This is a thing that you stick into the GameCube's video out port. So it's an external mod. I can unhook it and rehook it as I please, and then put HDMI into that.
So that sounds kinky.
Yes, that's what it. Yeah.
I should stress that the whole goal of doing this to your systems is to eventually have them all be able to upscale on their own without a middleman. As great as the OSSC and the FrameMeister are, the goal was to get rid of them. So
that's the thing. They're the best you have at the time. Like if I can get proper upscaling individual systems, then I won't need the middleman. Oh, and by the way, one thing I should mention that's kind of funny is that I'm going to this, I'm getting this esoteric HDMI mod made by a superfan in limited quantities, and it's still, about half the price of what the actual Nintendo component cables would cost today.
It's true.
Which is, whoa.
I plan on getting one of these solutions, but I want to do my research on which one's the best, because there's several of them out there. There's even an internal mod and all that.
Yeah,
stuff,
apparently the one I got is pretty new, so I'll see how it is. But that was kind of my little distraction, where I suspected Vice actually wanted to go next. This thing applies to both of us. And Vice is already kind of set with his thing because he ordered his earlier. I'm still waiting for mine. But when we last met for last Corrective Consciousness, we had both gotten our... We've talked about the PSIO before. It's going to be a thing that allows the PlayStation 1 to accept a device which holds an SD card. So it's kind of like a flash card equivalent for the PS1, even though the PS1 doesn't have cartridges, but the same logic applies. But in order to get that to work, you need to have modification done on your PlayStation 1's motherboard. So we had sent those in to the people who do that in Australia. And we had mentioned, like, we did this in, like, October, and we had joked at the time, like, we'll get our systems back in November if we are insanely lucky. But we got them back, and, like, we knew that wouldn't actually happen. So sure enough, we got them back in February, and then the actual SD card device is probably coming in March. But we got our circuit boards back, so now they are ready to at least accept that thing when it finally shows up. And this is kind of like, this isn't an upscale solution, but this is an EverDrive flash card solution for the PlayStation 1 if you want to play foreign or fan-translated games.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to building up a library for it because there are a lot of games on PS1 that I just missed out on.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to playing some of the rarer titles that are just like too hard to get now. Like there's a lot of shmups on there that are like really expensive now. They're like over $200. There's like oddities that I just kind of want to play in a party situation, like LSD Dream Simulator, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Dream Emulator, but yeah.
Dream Emulator, yeah.
Yeah, for me, I want to play fan-translated original Japanese Kingsfield, fan-translated Echo Knight 2, which a lot of people don't even know exists. Just for fun, fan-translated PS1 Clock Tower, not the one that America got, but the better version of the Super Nintendo game that was on PS1 as well. At this point, those are my top priorities.
Yeah, we'll have to get together and make a library, but
yeah, like I absolutely, like, number one is easily Kingsfield, just so I can play through the Kingsfield quadrilogy. Although I should mention, I did purchase this game on the PlayStation Network, but I think we talked about this before. But I also want to use the mod or the SD card thing for Suikoden 2, and the reason for that is that Suikoden 2. There are a bunch of games that do this. Suikoden 2, if you have Suikoden 1 save data, will be like, oh, and then an aspect of the game will change. So, okay, fine, whatever. I could do that on the PS3 anyway. But the thing is, Suikoden 3 does that with Suikoden 2. I think the PS3 actually also has Suikoden 3, so it's still not a problem. But Suikoden 4 and 5 do that as well. And I don't think the PS3 has 5. It might actually have 4 now, which is pretty amazing, but I don't think it has 5. If PlayStation Network has all 5 Suikoden games, then there is no problem. But if I want to transfer my data across all 5 games, I'm going to need to do it on the PS1 and PS2.
I don't think it goes through all 5.
I think it only goes from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and I don't know if it goes from 3 to 4.
I think 4 there might be like one line of flavor text or something, so it doesn't really matter. If it's only 1, 2, and 3, then I could just play it on PlayStation Network. But if I'm really neurotic, then I'll do all 5 physically. And I have what? What did you say?
You are.
I am.
You're really neurotic.
I am. Like I have physical copies of every Suikoden game except for 2 because it's like $120. Yeah. So I even paid for 2 legally through PSN. So there's no harm in me putting that in the SD card. So I could do that too.
I just want to, again, I want to use it for a number of games that just weren't released here. Just different shmups, and there have been a couple really neat fan translations recently. I kind of have a passing interest in the Ace Combat games. I don't know if you guys have ever played those, but they're arcadey kind of
Like first-person flight shooters, kind of?
Jet games, yeah. They're kind of like... they have missions, though, and, like... Apparently, a lot of the early ones, like, the series has always had kind of, like, an anime plot to it.
Yeah, I didn't know that until way later. Like, you'd never guess by looking at the cover.
Well, apparently they're not, like, rote simulations. They actually, like, you know, have their own plot and like, you know, a very interesting anime plot, you know? And they kind of stripped it out of the early ones. So there has been fan restoration projects going on for the early games. So even the ones that have been released already, you know, in English.
Yeah, actually, speaking of which, just any instance of undub that we could get on PS1. And for those who don't know what an undub is, it's almost exactly what Vice just said. Like, it restores cut content. Like, the first undub I had ever heard of because of Vice was Shenmue. You know, we got Shenmue here, but the undub of Shenmue restores the Japanese language because American Shenmue is dubbed in English, if you're into that kind of thing. But it also restores ads for like Coca-Cola, which were just removed. Like, America removed them because I don't know if they had the rights or whatever. You know, same goes for like Mario Kart. Like, Japanese Mario Kart has ads for not real companies, but you know, like, what they are.
Marlboro cigarettes.
Yeah, like not not Marlboro cigarettes, but like the color scheme's very similar and stuff like that. So if you're interested in just kind of restored weirdness that you missed out on just because of censorship or like rights issues, then undubs are pretty cool for that. Actually, one of the funniest examples for me is Criminal Girls. I don't know how many people are interested in actually playing Criminal Girls, but the thing with that game is, like, you have these criminal girls, and they're, like, old-timey, like, 1940s black and white striped, like, prison uniform, and I don't know exactly what the game entails. I guess you're dating them or something, but part of it involves some, like, I don't know what it is, but part of it involves, like, BDSM, where you just, like, straight up strike them, and they have, like, like, when you do it, but their moans of pleasure were removed from the American release because it's like, we don't want that kind of content. But
and they also censored some of the bodiness of it. Like they put like steam around, like, you know.
Even that, I'm way more interested in removing the moans of pleasure, because without those, the game gets really uncomfortable. You're just like abusing these people, and it's like it's actually worse because of the censorship. It's like arguably more worthy of censorship now that it's been censored. So it's kind of like, so like undoing that would kind of make the game ironically more palatable.
It's actually kind of funny because the Steam versions actually have restoration patches.
Patches, of course, yeah.
I was actually also interested in the Saturn game Magic Knight Ray Earth. So they actually did an undub of that because, like, if you were a fan of the anime, it has like the actual anime voice actresses in the Japanese version. So, like, if you're a fan of that anime, like, you might want to hear the original voice actresses being in the game.
Nice.
So like in the US version, it was a fine translation. It was done by Working Designs, but if you straight up just wanted to, you know, hear it just like you like the anime, like you can get an undubbed version of that.
Yeah, and by the way, cool. Regarding the Saturn in particular, we've discussed this before, but the Saturn is the system that I am most comfortable just emulating games for, because it's either discs or nothing. Even if you go on to Steam or like PlayStation Network or Xbox Live, you're not going to find Saturn games unless they had other ports. Like Fighting Vipers you can buy, but that's not a Saturn game. That was an arcade game that had a Saturn port. But if you're looking for like Panzer Dragoon, or not Panzer, well, maybe Panzer Dragoon, but if you're looking for Panzer Dragoon like Saga, like they lost the data for that game. Like if you don't have the disc, you're just not playing it without pirating it. Like you cannot possibly, and it's like a fucking $400 game. So, like, the same thing applies with Magic Knight Ray Earth. Like, that's, like, the last game released for the system in the West, so it's really expensive as a result. So, like, I'm not going to feel bad about using an emulator for a game like that, which they're never going to sell again anyway. They can't, and it's insanely expensive. Like, do you really want to buy...
We're using a Ray.
The Phoebe or the Ray, which is, like, the that's the Saturn flashcard equivalent.
Yep.
Like Saturn games, like even Sonic 3D Blast, that game's not very expensive, but the Saturn version is not available. Like you can buy it on Steam right now, but that's the Genesis version. The Saturn version, you'd better have a Saturn, and you better have the actual disc. Otherwise, you're out of luck. So that's a case where you can pick up that game easily enough, but that's why I'm not bothered by copying Saturn games, because like it's not like, oh, you're taking money away from the developers. Like, no, you can't pay the developers even if you wanted to. Like, you can not. It's just like when I import games from like Japan or something where I've modded my PS2 system. It's like, are you officially allowed to mod your PS2 system? No, but guess what? I wanted to pay the company that made the game. I wanted to, and they wouldn't take my money, so I paid some guy on eBay who sold me his copy, and I'm playing the damn game. Like, I could have given you the money, and now I'm giving it to this guy. There you go.
All right. Well, I guess the overarching plot of this episode was that we want better ways to enjoy our old systems, and they are finally catching up. This kind of thing is finally catching up to us. I'm sure in the future there will be even better, more convenient ways in order to enjoy our old systems, but for now this is the best thing, and it's great. I'm really glad that we hit this time and where I could just buy a souped up Super Nintendo, and it's like even better than the original. So, and it's easy to find, like it's not a chore to find, and it's very easy to use.
Yeah, just Google analog Super NT, like boom, there it is. There's the guy who makes it.
Yeah. So I'm very happy, and I'm looking forward to whatever the next development is in HDMI or clone systems. I hope a Genesis one at some point.
Oh my god! If they make a Genesis CD system, I will flip out.
That would be so cool.
Speaking of which, the Sega CD is one of the few retro systems at this point. Like, the fucking 3DO has one of these, and it was the first one. The PC Engine, I think, has one of these.
Yes.
But the Sega CD is one of the very few systems that does not have
an optical drive emulator.
Yeah, an SD flash card like equivalent. The PS1 has one. The fucking 3DO. The PS2 has like a hard drive mod, so it's not an SD card, but it has the same effect. The PC Engine has one. The Saturn's probably like my favorite that has one, because that of all systems, that one needs it. But the Sega CD,
the Dreamcast.
Yeah, the Dreamcast has one. But the Sega CD though, like,
nope.
That's another system where it has some games where they were just never released again. Like Rise of the Dragon, that was on the Sega CD, and like DOS. You can't buy it now. Snatcher's the most obvious example. You can't just go out and get Snatcher like on other systems. So like a Sega CD optical drive mod would be astounding. That'd be fantastic. Because at this point, that's the hardest game to buy games for, because it's hard to physically buy games for them. A lot of them are rare or expensive. Like, you'll see this, like, if you ever go to a store that has Sega CD games, it'll be the same 5 or 6 games you see in every other store, like the cheap generic like Cobra Command and stuff like that. Like, it's cool, but I bought this one already.
Yep. So like I said, we'll have plenty about to talk about this in the future, as new developments come out. But I'm excited for this era. So that's the show for this week. Please remember to subscribe to the Corrective Consciousness YouTube and Soundcloud pages. While there, please give us thumbs ups, likes, and 5-star ratings on iTunes. How come I can say this correctly and I can't say the intro?
Yeah, February 20...
February... It helps promote and spread awareness of the show, and any bit of encouragement helps keep the show going. Please also catch us on Tuesday on our sister podcast, Corrective Consciousness, the podcast about our lives and pop culture. Finally, you can friend me as vysethebold on Steam, PSN, Xbox Live, Twitter, and Battle.net.
And you can find me on my YouTube channel, Lotus Prince. You can hit me up on Twitter at Lotus Prince. And finally, if you are interested in seeing my videos early, getting in on exclusive live streams, or even selecting upcoming games for me to Let's Play, then perhaps consider swinging by my Patreon, which can be found at patreon.com/LotusPrince.
And I'm PyroJackFrost. You can find me as that or Cloudoid540 on most gaming media platforms.
All right. We'll catch you on Tuesday, guys.
Until next time, everyone.
Good night, everybody.